welcome. And you just drove in. Did you just drive in from Sacramento?
I did. Is the mic working? Is that okay?
Yes.
Can everyone hear me?
Can everyone hear?
Wonderful.
Yes. Okay. And congratulations. Were you just sworn in?
Just sworn in yesterday. So it's congratulations or condolences, one or the other. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll have the party today and then the work starts tomorrow,
yes,
right?
Well, the work started right after the election, unfortunately.
It did. Okay. So. Well, you know, Phil, what we've been talking about today is diversity, inclusion, and fostering a new generation of Asian American talent. And I want to ask you, I mean, you are in a position now where you have so much influence, but as an Asian American, how do you use that influence?
Well, I think it's so important to reflect on why you do things to begin with. And whenever I talk about people, a lot of folks, they come to me to talk about running for office or how to get more involved in politics. And I always ask them to take a step backward and say, what do you really want to get done? What are some of the goals that you want to accomplish? And for me, when I always think about how to judge myself or whether we're doing better as a society, I think about the Asian Law Caucus, like you mentioned, and I think about many of the clients that we had. We had clients that were working back then in garment factories, working in restaurants, not getting paid accurate wages. We have folks living in Chinatown and SROs and really tough living conditions. And I always think if we're pursuing policies that are helping them, helping their families, then we're actually making the state a better place. That means then you and I and our children will actually be in a much better place as well. So it's really trying to figure out or focus, what are you trying to get done and what are your goals in the long term?
Well, when we look at it from that standpoint, I really almost think you can compare Asian society to where Asian Law Caucus was maybe 15 or 20 years ago. When you start to make your voice heard, how do you go about that? As executive director way back when people were going, what is the Asian Law Caucus? Who are they helping and why should we care? How do you go about creating that voice of influence?
Sure. Well, I was very fortunate. When I took over the Asian Law Caucus as executive director in 2002, we already had a very long history. So we had groups that would seek us out rather than when the organization first started in 1972 in saying, hey, what do you think? I think you always start with making sure that the voice that you represent is more than just your own, and that you actually have a constituent, that you actually represent people. And for us, the key was always all the clients who came in for services. So we had a pretty good sense of what people needed. We had immigration clinics, so we knew what kind of immigration issues were going on, because every 2 weeks we'd have people come in for help, so we'd always know what was going on. We had employment clinics every 2 weeks, so again, issues around pay, unemployment, questions around benefits, all those issues, those weren't issues that we made up, but we had people that walk in our door. So a lot of what we do, or what I do for my constituents, we have people who walk in the door as well or call us for help. So I'm very fortunate to have the honor to represent 450,000 people in Sacramento. I have a district office here in San Francisco, but also an office in Sacramento. And issues that come up on a state level, people will call us or email us or let us know. So we always feel like we have at least some level of what the pulse is of the district. So I think it's really important to actually represent somebody more than just your own personal voice or your own personal ideas, that you really have some base of support or some people that you are really speaking for.
Let's go back a little bit. You grew up in Southern California. You now represent the 19th Assembly District here. How did you become the person who people look to as a leader? There could have been so many other people out there, but what was it, well, whether it was your growth as you grew up, what was it you feel like that made a difference in becoming the leader you are?
Well, I think what's interesting is that if you asked me when I was growing up, or maybe even when I was 20 and I was sitting in an audience like this, whether I would be an assembly member or elected official, I think I would have told you probably not. Because
your parents didn't say you need to be a lawyer or a doctor or anything like that?
My parents always encouraged me to get educated, but they never really forced me to figure out, they never told me what areas to get educated in. So I do have a master's degree, but they never told me what higher education I needed. But what's interesting is when I got politically active, which is when I went to UC Berkeley, there were not many role models. In fact, we would do what's called Student Lobby Day. The University of California has a student association. We go up to Sacramento and do Lobby Day. And back then, none of the 120 elected legislators, senators, and assembly members, there was not a single Asian American. I mean, at that point, we were well over 5 or almost 10% of the state, but there was not a single elected Asian American representative. So what was so interesting is I would just get excited because we would be able to see staff. At that point, we had some prominent Asian American staff members who were staff members to, at that point, Senate Pro Tem David Roberti. So here you are, the leader of the Senate, and you had Asian American staff members. So if you asked us back then, we would almost, I would almost feel aspire to that. And so I feel very lucky that the timing of my getting involved in activism and the timing of the political opportunities also worked. I look at people who are almost one generation ahead of me, really no different than me. Many of the doors were not open to them. Our community didn't really vote. We didn't have great numbers. So I was very fortunate that as I became an activist, those opportunities really came forward.
Well, obviously it was a journey, and at times it could have been a long journey, but what kept you going when you said you had no role models that you could see there?
Well, if you asked me when I was at Berkeley, my dream job was my Asian Law Caucus job. I would have said that being the executive director of the Asian Law Caucus, or back then I actually worked quite closely with Henry Durr and Ling Chi Wong at Chinese for Affirmative Action. I would have said that being the head of one of those two organizations, that would have been great. I could see myself doing that for the rest of my life, and I would have been very, very happy. And I think what I noticed is, at that time, as I was even before I took over the Asian Law Caucus job, I noticed that there were very few, almost zero, Chinese American elected officials. And at that point, in San Francisco, we were almost 30% of the population. You look at the Board of Supervisors, you look at the citywide officials, you would saw very, very little representation. And it's not like the Asian American community just got here recently. The Asian American community has been in San Francisco since the mid-1800s. So what is it about California, about San Francisco, that for some reason we could not break through? And I think there's a whole variety of reasons. One is political participation. One, we obviously had significant racial barriers. We had actually legal
talk about the challenges, not only faced on that level, but on a personal level as well.
Well, I think what was interesting is, I grew up in a suburb of LA, in a very nice suburb. So I can't say I faced all this hate or racism. I definitely faced my share of it, but nothing like the way previous generations had. But when I went to Berkeley and I took Asian American Studies, it was sort of like a political awakening. Most people don't ever realize the one ethnic group to ever be excluded, meaning not allowed to immigrate to the United States, was Chinese Americans. Most people don't even know that. They've never, ever realized that. People now know more about the Japanese American internment. There's a little bit more education, but it's still amazing in this day and age, and we just have to look at just a few weeks ago, all the dialogue about interning Muslims. And we had some very wise person say, hey, interning Muslims, there's precedence because we intern Japanese Americans, so clearly we could legally do it. So it doesn't take the climate to change that much to really shift very quickly. And so for me, when you look at Asian American Studies, what's fascinating is many of these policy decisions, and now that I'm in the room, many of these policy decisions are done by a few people. They're oftentimes done last minute, especially ones that are done in haste, especially during the World War II time. All these things were done very last minute. There are usually a few people in the room, and you realize if there are Asians in the room or no Asians in the room, you have a different result. So I'll guarantee you, when they talked about Japanese American internment and they talked about it in Washington or in California, there were no Asian Americans in the room or around the room or even close to the room when those decisions happened. And so it was a lesson for us, for our communities, that we really need to be part of this political process, because there are many good things government can do, but there are also many bad things government can do, and it's really important that your voices are heard in both those situations.
How do you, in the public service world, rise up the ranks, knowing you win in, and when you go in, you're the new kid on the block?
I heard sort of to the tail end of the panel, and I think what you're parents are supposed to say it's hard work, and I definitely think hard work is a very important ingredient. I would never say hard work is not, but hard work, unfortunately, is only part of the equation. I needed to be in the right place at the right time, so there was definitely a little bit of luck, but you have to be willing to put yourself out there. And I think that's one thing that often Asian Americans aren't willing to do. They don't want to be seen or heard or noticed. It's almost very cultural, very ethnic, and I think it makes it, in politics, almost impossible to succeed. Because if you don't want to make your opinions known, you don't want to make yourself known, you don't want to let people know what you stand for or what you do, it's impossible to get known in politics. So actually in politics, I think this presidential race is a prime example. You had one candidate who basically won an election based on saying the most inflammatory, off the wall, frankly, from our perspective, pretty crazy stuff. And somehow that kind of appealed because the press kept covering it. The more the press covered it, the more famous he got. And what's interesting, in a political world, you're almost encouraged to do more of that because you're trying to get a certain amount of your name and your brand out there. My brand is my own personal name, kind of the issues that I work on, just like any company or any corporation. And oftentimes, the biggest challenge of anything is trying to get known. Mm-hmm. So in politics, that's obviously one of the biggest hurdles.
So when you look at yourself as an Asian Pacific American, how do you raise your personal brand, your influence, while also serving the public? So professionally and personally, how do you sort of walk that line?
Sure. Even when I was at
Asian... And I just have to ask you though, are you a natural born just conversationalist, or is that something that a talent you had to acquire?
No, I think anytime you do public speaking, there's very, very few people who are natural born public speakers.
Were you good at it at the beginning?
No, I mean, it's funny. I think I thought I was better at it than I was until people started giving me feedback.
So what would they say?
It's very interesting. I remember.
Or did you see yourself? Did someone videotape you?
No, I have seen myself videotaped. I have gone, and even when I was in the business world, I have people kind of gone through coaching. But what's interesting is you always need to have some good friends who are willing to give you honest feedback, because you could be thinking you're doing great, and they're willing to, obviously not totally hurt your feelings, but at least give you.
Okay, tell us what they said.
It was right when I first started running for assessor, and I got appointed. Oh, Darlene's laughing. It wasn't you, Darlene. Well, even before, but I would say, but this is like she asked me specifically. And it's a mutual friend of myself and Darlene's, and he was a very nice guy. He said he couldn't really contribute to my campaign, but the one thing he could do was he could drive me around. So he would go with me everywhere. He would go with me to every single event. He would pick me up, drop me off, and so he was sort of like my touchstone. And he would be, just a total gentleman, but gave me very. Just solid feedback about what I was doing or not doing. And I think what was kind of interesting is he talked about somebody who was the previous assessor and the kind of presence they had, and sort of how when they spoke, people would listen and own that room. And he kind of just made it known that when you're speaking, you're not quite there. You don't really quite own that room. People aren't quite paying attention. And it was this process as we went back and forth as I went to all these public speaking engagements, that he would kind of continue to give me feedback or advice in a very nice personal way. And it was really through that initial campaign, I think, that really helped me change, because at that point, you really start to get a sense on your own personal voice. I mean, I'm sure as a newscaster, you need to find the voice that you deliver information in. And I think for all of us, we have our own voices and what kind of feels comfortable, what feels right.
But you have to find that other person who will give you that honest feedback,
absolutely.
I think, to help find your own voice.
Yes, absolutely. Because otherwise, then you're doing the same thing over and over and over again, and you're thinking this is great, and everybody's falling asleep, and you can't quite figure out what's going on.
Well, practice makes perfect, yes. Too, I think. when we have been talking this entire day about diversity and inclusion and talking about companies, but you can look at it from both the company side and the political side. What more can be done, we know things need to be done, but what more can be done to help companies recognize, I think, the growing influence of the Asian American community and the potential leaders who are out there who need to get that opportunity to shine and to become true leaders?
You know, I always look at it, especially when I'm approaching somebody or some entity, is really trying to understand what's in their interest, or what do they care about? What do they really want to do? And companies at the end of the day want to make money. They're trying to sell their products. They're trying to grow their revenue. And what I was reminded, a good friend of mine, Bill Amata, he was one of the pioneers in really marketing to Asian Americans, and he would always talk to us in the community, but also corporations, about how large the buying power was for Asian Americans. So it was never about, hey, you should do this because it's the right thing, or it's a good thing, or it was because it's the nice thing to do. Well, if you don't specifically market to Asian Americans, and so he would talk about it, if you don't put Asian Americans in your advertising campaign, if you don't really find a way to speak to them, you're not going to get their business, and somebody else who figures it out well. And so to me, it was always trying to figure out, well, why should a corporation diversify? It's not like the way government should, because it's for the public good. It's really about the business needs to also reflect the customers that they're pursuing. And at some point, the businesses are doing more of that. I think our biggest challenge has been really cracking some of those glass ceilings and moving further up. And what's interesting to me is, as I even look at my own career, a lot of times the way you crack glass ceilings isn't by staying in the same place and trying to crack a glass ceiling. It's literally, a lot of times you have to go start your own thing. And we see that quite often here in San Francisco or Silicon Valley, where you have a lot of entrepreneurs, and at some point they know that they can't really get ahead where they're at, so they have to go start their own business or their own company, because the only way they're going to be able to lead a company is if it's their own. So I think that's going to be the next evolution for us as a community, to kind of realize that it's okay to take that risk and to just go out, that it could be time just to do that.
I'm going to open it up for questions. I know we have a few more minutes, and I'll open it up for questions in just a second. But quickly, Phil, tell us, what is the Asian American makeup now of the legislature and of state government?
The Asian American makeup is now, we have, I think it's 9 Democrats out of the senators and the assembly members, and 4 Republicans. So that would be 13 of us. It's the highest number it's ever been. It's 13 out of the 120. And we also have the highest number of Republicans. What's interesting is you don't see very many African American or Latino Republicans. You're starting to see the Asian American Republican numbers grow, which it traditionally hasn't. So that's going to be sort of an interesting way to figure out how we're going to work together, working across party lines. And
how do you do that? I mean, what is your strategy?
I have to tell you, it's been very challenging. It's been, and part of it is we have Democratic supermajorities. We find there aren't as many issues as I would have hoped that we really agree on. And so we keep trying to figure and find issues that we agree on. One issue that we did work on the last 2 years was around appointments, especially in the judicial area. So trying to get more Asian Americans appointed to positions within government. We definitely both agreed on that, and we definitely work with the administration to find different people that we can support and help along that. But that part's been a little bit disappointing. We haven't found as many issues that we feel like we can work on together.
Well, I just want to veer off to the appointments, because earlier in my career, after 10 years as a journalist, I felt like I was burned out, and I said I had always been close to politics and government, but I wanted to learn more, and I became a governor's appointee under George Duke Majan. And so it was kind of a career twist for me, but here is really a group of some potential appointees out there who might be interested. So what are you looking for? If people are saying, I have a voice that needs to be heard, and I think that I could be a good addition, that I could I'd like to help and be a part of
Well,
state
frankly, you're
government.
looking for anybody who's willing to dedicate the time. In an ideal world, some of the primary positions, it's a little bit different now because Governor Brown's sort of on the tail end of his administration. So it's actually not a bad time, because a lot of times people will be looking to leave because they've been there for 6 years and they're on their way out. So you could actually be there for the tail end and actually get some good experience and use that to jump to the next position. The other opportunity is that you could get appointed to a myriad of commissions that have legislative oversight, policy oversight, have a certain amount of influence in a variety of areas within California. And anybody can get appointed.
And how many
to those.
appointees? I mean, there are
Hundreds.
Yes.
There are hundreds. Hundreds to probably thousands. I mean, if we probably added it up between the commissions and the actual people that work at high levels, it's got to be almost 1,000 or more than 1,000.
I mean, I encourage all of you, if government is something that you would like to explore, it's a great opportunity, and it's so diverse, the different
What's been
areas.
interesting is, as the journalism field has changed, I've noticed a lot of journalists have actually started working for our city county. So it's interesting to see that evolution.
How important is it to diversify your own career?
It's interesting because I think it's really about your own personal interests. I think if your personal interests are diverse and you have the opportunity, it's great. But as you go further and further along in your career, people want specialists. And we've almost seen this now in this age of the internet, where the websites or the information out there is more and more and more specialized. So they're actually looking for people who are more and more specialized. So I think it's a challenge at a time when the economy is becoming more specialized. It is more challenging to move from place to place unless you have a skill that's easily moved from place to place.
All right, I have to ask one more question before I open it up, but with our recent presidential election, as you look ahead to the next 4 years, where do Asian Americans stand, and what do we as citizens need to be aware of, need to do to take an active role and be a voice?
At this point, Asian Americans weren't singled out, except for the Asian Americans who happen to be Muslim, singled out by the president-elect. But I think it's just a very easy jump to go from Muslims to any minority group. So I think Asian Americans have to be very vigilant and very cognizant of what that tone is. Like I said, I don't think you have to look that far into recent history about really damaging things like the Japanese American internment and all those parallels of what happened in terms of a xenophobic rise and an ultra-nationalist rise that really led to that. So I think it's really important to know that it can happen. It's not some sort of fantasy or figment of our imagination, but that it really could. I think the other thing is, just because we're not impacted, say, by Muslims directly, I think it's really important that as people are impacted, that we also stand up and be a voice against that oppression or that injustice. I don't think we should just say, oh, well, we're not directly impacted, so we don't have to say anything. I think it's absolutely wrong. I think that the only way that we could really stop this sort of injustice is by standing together.
All right, quickly, do I have any questions from the audience? Yes, in the back there, please. Please state your name and your company.
Hi, David Rajasingham with Kaiser Permanente. So one of the questions I had was, how can Asians, as a collective body, which is very diverse, sort of flex our collective influence around both in the political arena, in the corporate arena, and sort of vote not only with our feet, but also with our wallets.
Yeah.
And I think that's the opportunity.
Well, I think it's a great question. So one, there are organizations out there like Asian Law Caucus, civil rights organizations that you can continue to reach out to, work with, be part of. As you feel like organizations really don't meet your needs, I would really encourage you to figure out how to collectively organize that. It's not just temporary. What I've seen sort of temporary flashpoints over some action or something happen, and they kind of come and go. They're like an internet petition that comes and goes away. But when you're done with it, even if you got a good result, there's no real critical mass left. So I would really urge, as you think about that, is it is important to come together, and it is important to come together around either permanent organizations or to go form permanent organizations and building that permanent critical mass to stay active. Because otherwise, it's just one person's opinion, one flashpoint, and they come and go quickly. So I think it is important to be active and stay active, and it's hard for individuals to stay active by themselves, for themselves for a long time, that it really is important to have those organizations that you are part of, so that it's not just you. So even at some point when you get tired and you want to step away, there is someone left to keep going. In terms of politics, the way that politics is kind of structured, I would just say in California, because I'm a little bit more familiar with it, say in California or in the Bay Area at least, is really through political clubs. And so I think it is important that if you are interested, there's so many political clubs, you can frankly join any particular one, that there are ways to get more active, but it is the starting point to get more involved in the way that the organizing is done in California is primarily through our party system. There are also other very influential groups, whether it's chambers or labor unions or other organizations that are also active. So say for Kaiser, there are, and I don't know if you're a doctor, but there are, the Permanente group is very active with the California Medical Association, which is very active statewide. So that's an avenue for doctors. For many of the workforce that is unionized at Kaiser, they are active through their own unions. And so that is another way. I don't see, it's ironic, right? There are clearly a lot of Asian doctors, but when I get visits from doctors, I don't see that many Asian doctors. They're not that active in their own medical association, or if they are, they're not rising, right? Or Anna's shaking her head when I get, you think, does anyone think there's a shortage of Asian accountants? But when I meet with the government relations people or the managing partner, it's usually not Asian. So again, you don't have to jump out of your comfort zone or out of your career lane, but there are other ways to be politically active that are already set up by the industries that you're already in, that you can move
But you have
through.
to make an effort. You have to make your voice heard.
Woody Allen said half of life is showing up, and it's easy because we're all busy. We all have dinner to go cook. We all have kids to go raise, family to go do. But I'll tell you how many. Part of you asked is, how did I get here? Well, how I got here is I missed a lot of personal things because this is what I love doing, and I showed up. I missed a lot of watching football games or grabbing drinks with my friends because there was always some meeting to go to at 7 o'clock. When I was in college, I didn't go to a lot of the college football games that I love going to because there was always some meeting on Saturday at 1 o'clock that I had to go to. So these are real sacrifices, and I know that for everybody who's on a career track, you have those same sacrifices, but it's no different in politics.
I know we had one quick question here.
So for our younger generations, what are some of the ways we can expose them to careers in politics, for example, to encourage them to perhaps think about that in a future where you may not?
Easiest way to
For the younger generation to expose them to a career in politics.
Yeah, easiest way is in every community, you have, in California, you have an assembly member, you have a senator, you have a congressional representative, you have city councils, you have supervisors. We are always looking for interns and volunteers. So when they're young, it's great. I would, if they're really interested, I'd encourage them to intern with their local representatives. And usually, if you only ask one person, you may not get it. But if you ask around enough, you could probably get an internship or some opportunity to spend time with those elected officials, and then you get a chance to see how government works at a very specific level.
Okay, one quick question. That is it, right here, please. Your name, please, and your.
Steve Terasaki with Sato Consulting. The recent election and the reverberations that President-elect Trump has sent out about global trade has already made some impacts to global commerce. I was at a company up in Napa yesterday
who said that they've had to reduce their expectations for revenue for next year because of customs implications for their products to get into China. Obviously, the Bay Area has an enormous stake in this global trade issue. What can the California legislature do to ensure that Californians have that access to global trades that may be impacted by federal legislation?
Sure. The legislature doesn't have any impacts on tariffs. But I think what we can do is to ensure that the industries that are impacted, that we're going out of our way, as well as to other countries, that we're going out of our way to welcome other countries, other industries. In fact, the Thursday after the election, the speaker and we led a trade mission to China, and it was just sort of coincidence. We thought we were going to lead a trade mission with President-elect Clinton coming in, not President-elect Trump. So the tone of the mission actually made it significantly more important. But as legislators, I think we only can control what we can control, and that's our own actions, our own laws. So as much as we can make our laws receptive to trade and our policies in our own offices, that's all we can do. We can't impact tariff policies. So again, that's going to be run at the executive branch in Washington. We can obviously express our opinions about it, and we definitely will. But again, there's only so much we can do outside of just us expressing our ideas and thoughts.
On behalf of Asia Society Northern California, Assemblyman Phil Ting, thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Sydney. Thank you, everybody, for coming.